Good afternoon. Welcome to the Analyst. We'll be taking up 5 newspaper articles today and discussing them. Before moving forward, there will be some handouts available in the description of this video for your kind perusal. Now, first article that we'll be discussing today will be Ukraine. We'll be holistically analyzing the details of Russia versus Ukraine and the recent update of the Kerch Bridge attack as well. The second article is regarding the data protection law that is expected to be tabled in the parliament in the upcoming session. And the third article is regarding the delimitation. That question has not been settled yet. The fourth article is regarding Rule 267 of the Conduct of Business Rules in Rajya Sabha. And the final article is regarding the implementation of Ayushman Bharat, a healthcare scheme. Now the first one, why Kerch Bridge attack is significant. This is important in GS2 in the topic Politics and Policies of the Developing and Developed Countries and its impact on India. Before moving on with the analysis of Ukraine, let's look at the map and understand the regions of Ukraine where the action is taking place. When we observe the map of Ukraine, this is Kiev, this is the river Dnieper. This region is Kharkiv in the northeast of Ukraine. This region is Luhansk and this is Donetsk. This combined area is known as the Donbas region in Ukraine. In down south, this is the port of Odessa. This is Crimea, which Russia had annexed in 2014. And here it is the Kherson region also. Now, Russia is trying to gain territories in this region and the Ukrainian forces, they are launching counteroffensives continuously. Now, let's talk about the recent update first. This Kerch Bridge, this links the Russian mainland with the Crimean Peninsula. The Crimean Peninsula is not directly linked with the Russian mainland, and therefore Russia had tried to gain a land bridge after its special military operation that it started over a year ago. Now, there is a symbolic as well as operational importance of this Kerch Bridge because it provides the direct connectivity between the Russian mainland and Crimea also, plus the land bridge that Russia had secured from the Russian mainland to Crimea, that is very close to the front line of the war, and there Ukrainian forces, they continuously keep on launching counteroffensives, and therefore this is very close to the range of the Ukrainian fire, and therefore this logistical supply link that is crucial for the Russian troops stationed down south near Odessa and near the Kherson region, from where they have backtracked recently also, this Kerch Bridge becomes very important. Now, these are operational details which are not very important for us to know, but this war, this geopolitics we need to understand, and how Indian interests are impacted and how should Indian foreign policy should be in that region. Let's come back and look at the story behind it. Ukraine was promised the NATO membership in 2008. Now, naturally, Russia would not like to have a NATO ally right next door on its very borders. That will impact the strategic calculations of Moscow. Therefore, Russia moved aggressively after that. For example, in 2014, it annexed Crimea, and it even started supporting militancy in the Donbas region, that is the eastern region of Ukraine that borders Russia. Thus, the West has also played a role by promising NATO membership to Ukraine. Now, recently, there is a supply of more advanced weapons from the West to Ukraine, which has been supporting it. For example, US has given almost $70 billion worth of weapons to Ukraine and other supplies. Likewise, even European Union has pledged almost $40 billion of aid in terms of fighting and other similar resources. Now, recently, there were even cluster ammunitions which were provided by the USA to Ukraine. Cluster munitions are those which burst in the air itself and they cause damage over a large area, and they are even criticized because they cause large impact on the civilian areas. They cause heavy casualties also. Therefore, recently, even in the New START treaty, Russia refused to participate in it, and this has led to concerns that it might trigger a nuclear arms race, because both Russia as well as the NATO, they are nuclear powers, and there is a risk of a direct confrontation because Ukraine is launching its own counteroffensives to regain lost territories, although it has not gained much. And on the other hand, there are several takes on the objectives that Russia is trying to achieve through this military operation. Now, the stated objectives by Putin are that they want to demilitarize, denazify Ukraine. Although it is said that Putin wants to take Kyiv and install a pro-Kremlin regime in Ukraine. And the commanders of Putin, they have a very radical take. They say that Russia should take the entire eastern region of Ukraine from Kharkiv in the north to the Donbas region in the east to Kherson and Odessa in the south, so that Russia has a hold over that area. Now, Russia's territorial gains have been significant. As of March this year, it even controlled about 20% of Ukrainian territories, and recently Ukraine is trying to regain some of that but has not been successful as much. Now, what is the West strategy here in the Ukrainian war? It has been twofold. One, the West wants to impose sanctions on Russia. But those sanctions that it has imposed in terms of the economic sanctions, most of them have backfired. Because these sanctions that is imposed, they led to an inflationary crisis in Europe rather, because Europe is dependent upon cheap gas imports, energy imports from Russia, whereas Russia found alternative markets for its energy. When it comes to export of oil as well as natural gas, they even increased because it found markets in Asia in terms of China as well as India. India is also purchasing a lot of Russian oil now. On the other hand, another strategy of West was arming Ukraine. There was a lot of aid which was coming to Ukraine from the US as well as Europe. Now there are even advanced ammunitions. Whereas the West wants to project itself on a moral high ground also. For example, it says that it is a global crusade for democracy. They say that we want to ensure that the authoritarian regimes like that of Russia, they are not spread throughout the world. But this argument is actually debatable. For example, the large democracies in the world, the largest democracy, India, abstained from the UN voting. Likewise, the large democracies in Africa as well as Latin America, South Africa, for example, Brazil, for example, they also abstained in the UN voting. Therefore, this argument that this is a global crusade for democracy, it falls flat on its face. Likewise, even Israel has gained territories from all over its neighborhood, but nobody says anything to Israel. Another school of thought even says that this war in Ukraine, that is actually a problem of Europe. Because now the post-Cold War security architecture of Europe, that is being realigned. Then when we talk about morality, the West again cannot have position itself on a high ground because it is taking that ground because it is suiting its political interests or it is suiting its national interests. When it did not suit its national interests, it took interventionist measures in other countries. For example, it bombed Yugoslavia in 1999. There was invasion of Iraq in 2003, likewise in Libya. Now, if you take that same argument, then countries like India, they should also take care of their national interest before positioning themselves only on the basis of the moral high ground. That is one school of thought. Now, what is the possibility of a settlement here? There are two complex issues which need to be addressed for any settlement to last. For example, one is the Ukraine's territories. Ukraine naturally wants to regain its lost territories, and any country, its territorial integrity and sovereignty, that must be respected. But Russia has also genuine security concerns because a NATO ally right next door will affect its calculations. Therefore, the possibility of a settlement that will fructify only if the Western capitals, they also agree to it, because the Western capitals are actually arming Ukraine. They are the ones who are supporting Ukraine in this war. Now, what are the India's interests in this region? If you observe, we are dependent on Russia for several things. One, in terms of energy imports. India imports almost 80% of its oil needs. Now, we are importing cheap oil from Russia. When we look at defense, In the past 5 years or so, almost 50% of India's weapons have been of Russian origin when we talk about the imports of weapons. Likewise, the ties with China, for them to be stable, we need Russia also. When we talk about the continental security concerns, again we need Russia. Particularly after the withdrawal of USA from Afghanistan, we need Russia for the continental security. For the maritime security, yes, we may take the support of USA, but for continental security, we need Russia. Then we need to focus on broader goals. For example, the stabilization of global economy or the more pressing needs, maybe climate change, terrorism, etc. Now, what has India's stand been for this? Now, when we are concluding such a debatable topic or we are giving our opinions in such areas, we should use some broad ideals. For example, India is not a client state of any great power anymore, and we are also not the part of any alliance system. Quad is not an alliance, by the way. Therefore, we have not condemned Russia. We have not adhered to the sanctions imposed by the West. We are buying oil also, and we have abstained in the UN resolutions. Therefore, our actions are rooted in realism. We are following pragmatic neutrality. We are having a neutral position anchored in strategic autonomy. And this is not an isolated position. For example, even UAE, where the USA has stationed thousands of troops, that also abstained in the UN voting. Likewise, Israel also, that is also not adhering exactly to the sanctions. And when we look at Turkey, that is a NATO ally and that is actually mediating between Russia and Ukraine. Therefore, there was no joint statement at the G20 foreign ministers meeting also. Hence, India is taking a pragmatic stand in this situation. The next article is regarding the data protection law. Now, this is important in paper 2 in governance also, and in paper 3 awareness in fields of IT, space, etc. Now, before talking about the data protection regime in India, let's talk about data and a couple of arguments also here regarding data localization. Now, why does data matter so much? We say that data is the new oil. Because if we click on any Facebook post or maybe we buy an online product, all that information that is stored, captured and stored on the internet forever. Now that shows our preference, that shows our online behavior, and this personal data, it can link us to our personal identity also, maybe tell about our bank details, etc. Therefore, this data is prone to misuse. Misuse how? For example, through profiling, for studying and altering citizen behavior, then specific ads will be shown to us because our preferences that has already been collected and that has been sold to the third party advertising agencies. Thus, it will impact all three, the individuals also, the nations also, and the businesses also. The individuals are impacted because there will be privacy concerns. The businesses will be impacted because there will be anti-competitive practices also. Then in terms of nations, they will be impacted because there will be national security concerns. Now, when we look at the recent concerns, there has been the data breach in the form of COVID. A Telegram bot was sharing personal information related to Aadhaar, even passport information, etc., along with the phone numbers. That data breach was plugged although. Then when we look at internationally, Meta, it was fined because it violated the European Union GDPR regulations, the General Data Protection Regulations. It transferred the data, the personal data of the users of Facebook, of the European users of Facebook to USA. Now, who handles this data and how? See, data is stored in a physical space and it is transported through the underwater cables, the deep sea cables, very long cables. And there are entities which are created, because if entities are not created, then it will be difficult to delineate the responsibilities and ensure accountability. For example, there are data fiduciaries. Data fiduciaries are those who control how that data which is collected that will be processed. Now there also, if we take the example of maybe Facebook, the data controller was penalized because of the actions of Cambridge Analytica, the data processor. Likewise, there are arguments for data localization and against it. Those arguments are based upon certain things like data flows. They determine who will have access to the data, who will own that data, who will profit off of that data, and who will tax that data, because it is all about money actually. Then what are the arguments for data localization? One is it will ensure that law enforcement will be easy, because the local law enforcement agencies, they will be easily able to access the data, and therefore right now the situation which is cumbersome, that won't be there. Right now what happens is there are mutual bilateral legal assistance treaties, and through that data sharing is allowed. Now that process is cumbersome and it takes time. Then there will be no concerns regarding the foreign attacks or foreign surveillance upon the data. For example, if sensitive personal data like genetic fingerprints, biometrics, or maybe financial history, financial records, etc., they are mined and they are mined offshore, then it might lead to foreign surveillance also, and it will impact the data sovereignty. Through data localization, India will be able to tax the internet giants easily. And the domestic born technology companies, they are in favor of data localization because they have stored most of the data within India only. For example, Paytm, Reliance Jio, etc., they have been arguing for data localization. Then compliance will be easy. But there are certain issues regarding data localization. There are arguments against it. One is it will be cost intensive, because that server infrastructure that will have to be built again, and particularly for the small companies, the cost of compliance will be very high. And there is a possibility of misuse also by the state, because some social media measures like Facebook, they say that some authoritarian states, etc., they will be misusing that data if that is stored within the confines of that country. And USA has criticized that this will lead to trade distortion, because USA has said the data localization norms that India is proposing, that is most discriminatory. Then it might lead to discouraging of investments also, and it will lead to a kind of a domino effect. For example, if we do not cooperate in terms of free flow of data, then it might inhibit the completion of other commercial agreements, for example, FTAs, free trade agreements, etc. Now the definition of data misuse, that is also not the same, because there are varying scales from profiling to threats to the national security. There are different levels of data. Now what are the various models for data protection that are being used throughout the world? Let's have a look at that also before coming on to the Digital Data Protection Bill 2022. In European Union, they have the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations, and there the right to privacy is guaranteed as a fundamental right, and the individual's dignity, that is upheld. And the individual has the right over the data that she creates. Now there are criticisms that the regulations there, they are very stringent actually. Whereas when we look at the USA, there the data protection is focused upon the liberty of the individual. The liberty protection that protects the individual's personal space against the excesses of the state. Although there are no comprehensive set of privacy rights as such or principles regarding data protection in USA, but there are limited sector specific regulations over there. Now when we look at the Indian context, the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill 2022, that is in line with the Puttaswamy judgment, which conferred the right to privacy as a fundamental right for every individual, that is contained, that is implicit within Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. Now the Data Protection Bill, that consists of the main things, that is the right of the individual to protect their personal data and the need to process that personal data for lawful purposes. It is one of the main 4 proposed legislations which will reform our entire digital ecosystem, one of them being the Digital India Bill that is supposed to overhaul the IT Act 2000. Another one is regarding bringing in a new policy for the regulation of the non-personal data, etc. Therefore, it is one of the main reforms which is proposed. Now let's look at the history also before its analysis. In 2018, the first draft was presented by the Justice B.N. Sri Krishna Committee, After that, a bill was prepared in 2019. Now there were a lot of concerns regarding that. But in 2021, the Joint Parliamentary Committee, which took care of the bill, that submitted its report along with a few recommendations, and in 2022 again the bill was presented. Now, but the central government again withdrew that bill, and the revised Digital Personal Data Protection Bill was issued by MeitY in 2022, and it was open for public consultation. Now it is expected to be tabled. Now regarding the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill 2022, which is slotted to be tabled in the Parliament. One, regarding its applicability. It defines first thing the personal data, which consists of any data which can link us to our personal identity, and secondly it will take care of both the data collected within India as well as the data collected outside India. Within India also it will consist of both the data which is collected online as well as the data which is collected offline and then digitized. Now it talks about the consent. That consent of the individual whose data is to be processed, that has to be taken, and for that a notice has to be given, and the individual can withdraw the consent at any time. That consent will be taken for the processing of that data for a lawful purpose. Now it imposes certain duties as well as gives certain rights to the data principal also. Data principal is the person whose data is to be used, collected or processed. Now the rights of the data principal include that he can obtain the information, he can seek correction, erasure or grievance redressal, and he is also duty bound not to share any false information and not to impersonate. When it comes to the obligation of the data fiduciaries, they are duty bound to ensure through all the reasonable means the accuracy and completeness of the data. The safeguards are to be ensured to make sure that there is no breach of the data, and also if there is any breach, then information has to be given to the Data Protection Board of India as well as to the individual whose data has been compromised. And there are storage limitations also, that is, data cannot be stored beyond the period when its purpose is met. Now regarding the transfer of personal data outside India, earlier there was a whitelisting approach, that is, the government will notify to which countries data, the cross-border data flow can be allowed. Now the approach has changed. The government is planning to ensure that there is a kind of a blacklisting, that is, by default data free flow will be allowed to every country, but some countries can be blacklisted. There are certain exemptions also which are provided to the government agencies for collection of data, for example, on the basis of national interest or security of state, etc. There will be a Data Protection Board of India which will ensure the compliance with the provisions of this bill. But the appointment of the members of Data Protection Board of India, they will be controlled, their terms of appointment, etc. They will be controlled by the central government. And there will be penalties which can be imposed. For example, up to 150 crore can be imposed as penalty for violation of child related regulations, for example taking the consent of the guardian, or up to 250 crore penalty can be imposed in case of breach of data. But there are certain issues with this bill. For example, there are exemptions to the state on broad grounds like security of state, national interest, etc., or prevention of offenses. They are very broad, and there the doctrine of proportionality comes into picture. The doctrine of proportionality states that any right can be taken away. For example, here the right to privacy will be in question. It can be taken away only if the means used to interfere in that right, they are proportionate to the objective that is sought to be achieved. Now here in case of PUCL versus Union of India, which talks about the interception of communication, there the Supreme Court even gave certain safeguards. For example, there should be necessity for such interference, for such interception of communication. There should be purpose limitation and there should be storage limitation. So such guidelines, they should also be embedded in the language of the data protection bill that is argued. Another issue is the differential treatment that is given to the private entities. For example, the government entities, they do not need to delete the data after the purpose for which the data was collected that has been completed. When we look at the UK data protection law safeguards, there are safeguards. For example, it requires a warrant and there are the investigatory authority bill also, according to which data is to be collected, and it is subject to the parliamentary oversight also. Such mechanisms can also be inbuilt in the Indian data protection law. Then data protection board, that is not statutory, which was envisioned in the 2019 bill. It is not so in the latest one, and the appointments also, they will be controlled by the central government. Therefore, its independence will be in question. There is no right to be forgotten, which is included in this bill. And regarding the verifiable consent, which is included in this bill, age will be a factor which will be important here. For example, there are different definitions of child in various countries. Under the Indian data protection law, any person less than 18 years of age, he will be treated as a child. Whereas in USA and UK, any person under 13 years, he will be treated as a child for data protection. Above 13 years, that person is eligible to give consent for the sharing of data. Then there is no compensation, although there are huge penalties that can be imposed for the breach of data, etc. But there is no provision for compensation for the victim whose data has been misused. Then it might lead to a situation of a splinter net kind of a thing, that is a fractured internet. And this protectionism may actually backfire. The requirement of localization of the data, that can backfire. For example, it can stifle the growth of young Indian startups, or even the large companies also may be impacted. For example, TCS, Wipro, etc. They are processing the data of the foreign nationals in India. Therefore, this detailed analysis of this bill will be presented after the bill is tabled in the parliament. Now the next question is regarding the delimitation. This is important in paper 2 as the features and significant provisions of the Indian Constitution. Before talking about the article, let's talk about delimitation first. Delimitation is the act of or process of fixing limits or boundaries of territorial constituencies. Therefore, the boundaries of the territorial constituencies, whether for the elections to Legislative Assembly or for the elections to the Lok Sabha, they are determined in such a manner that from each constituency, each MP is representing the same number of people. For example, it will depend upon the population density. Like in Delhi, it sends in 7 Lok Sabha MPs because of the huge population density, whereas a similar geographical area in Ladakh, etc. will send a single MP, because the purpose here is that one member of parliament or one member of state legislative assembly, they should represent equivalent number of people. Now, this redrawing of boundaries, that is to represent the changes in population also. Therefore, after each census, these constituencies, they need to be delimited again. When we look at the equal representation, there are some exceptions also. For example, Tripura, Manipur, etc. they are sending in 2 MPs, although they do not have as much population. When we look at Lakshadweep, it sends in 1 MP for just about 68,000 people. Now, this number of seats, that may vary. For example, in Delhi, it has 7 Lok Sabha MPs, but when we look at the Legislative Assembly, there are 70 territorial constituencies for the state legislature. Now, what is the objective of this delimitation? 1, it ensures equal representation, a fair division of the geographical areas, so that no political party is at an advantage or at a disadvantage, and the population of all constituencies, as far as practicable, shall remain equal. Now, this provision has remained contentious, and that is why the states which are taking population controlling measures, they at times feel that they are at a disadvantage. For example, the southern states, because there the population increase will not be as much, whereas in the northern states, because the population increase is more, therefore the number of people, the number of MPs that they will be sending to the parliament, that will be higher. Now, what are the constitutional provisions regarding delimitation? One is Article 82, as per which the Delimitation Commission is to be set up, a Delimitation Act is to be set up after each census. Article 170 ensures that delimitation is done in every state constituency also. Then Articles 330 and 332, they provide for the provisions of reservation for SCs and STs in the legislative constituencies. The Delimitation Commission is a high-powered body. Its orders, they have the force of law and they cannot be called in question before any court. The orders of the Delimitation Commission, they are laid before both the houses, the Lok Sabha as well as the Legislative Assembly of the state concerned, although no modifications are permissible therein. Now this high-powered body, this is appointed by the President and its composition is that of one, it has one retired Supreme Court Justice. It also consists of one Chief Election Commissioner and the State Election Commissioners of the concerned state. It has been constituted 4 times till now, one in 1952, then in 1963, then in 1973 and then in 2002. But there has been a temporary suspension of delimitation. For example, the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act that amended Article 81 subclause 3, according to which there was a freeze on further delimitation up to 2000. That is, that 1971 census that will form the basis of the delimitation of territorial constituencies up till 2000. Now this was further extended from 2000 to 2026 through the 84th Constitutional Amendment Act. Now what are the issues of delimitation in various areas apart from the obvious concern regarding the population control measures that the southern states are taking? One, when we talk about the northeast, the 4 states Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, Manipur and Nagaland, there the delimitation exercise even in 2002 that had to be deferred because various organizations, they made representations that the delimitation should not be done on the basis of the 2001 census. Likewise, in Assam, there was another argument that the NRC, the National Register of Citizens, that has not been updated yet, therefore delimitation should be deferred. Accordingly, the Parliament amended the Representation of People Act 1950 and Section 8A was inserted into it, according to which that the delimitation in the 4 states of the northeast, that won't be done by a delimitation commission, that will be done by the election commission itself. But although now a new delimitation commission was set up for the delimitation in J&K, which was mandatory after the change of status quo in J&K, but that was also to make sure that the delimitation of the 4 northeastern states should also be done. Now there are arguments that this is illegal, this is unconstitutional because the Parliament had decided in 2008 that delimitation in the 4 northeastern states that should be done as per the Election Commission, not the Delimitation Commission. Now, is there any precedent which vests the Election Commission with the powers to ensure delimitation is carried out as per the Election Commission? Yes. For example, in Delhi, delimitation was carried out through the Election Commission in 1991. Likewise, in Uttarakhand, it was carried out in 2000. Therefore, that is one concern. When we talk about the implication of delimitation for the Northeast and J&K, although it will be done as per the 2001 census, but it will not lead to any change of the number of seats that is allotted to that particular seat. That is the number of MPs that state will be sending to the Parliament, that won't change. But it will be redrawing the boundaries within that state, the boundaries of the territorial constituencies within that state, and also it will rework the reserved seats, the seats which are reserved for the SCs and STs. Although in case of J&K, the seats will also be increasing from 107 to 114 because of its exceptional past circumstances, and also it is said that it is to increase the representation of the Jammu region. Now the article talks about why to wait until 2026 census. Because there are imbalances in the population growth between the northern and southern states. The southern states, their population is not increasing as much, whereas the decennial growth rates of the northern states, that is 12 to 15%. Therefore, if we look at the current distribution of population, the northern states will deserve 32 seats more, and the seats allocation to the southern states will decline by almost 24 seats when we look at the population composition right now. Therefore, it is a bone of contention between the northern states and the southern states, or the states which are following the population control measures. Now, this was proposed to be frozen up till 2002, but the issue was persisting till then also. Now it has been frozen till 2026 because the assumption is that by then there will be a kind of a uniformity which will be there. Meanwhile, Madras High Court also gave a formula by which it was actually saying that Tamil Nadu should be given compensation, because Tamil Nadu used to send 41 MPs to the Lok Sabha till 1962, but from 1967 onwards it is sending 2 MPs less because of the population control measures that it was taking from the very initial days after the independence of India. Therefore, Madras High Court even said that Tamil Nadu deserves compensation almost 5,000 crores. Now, what is the ratio between the parliamentary representation between the northern states and the southern states? That is going to widen, and there should be a normative proportionality based on the population, and that norm should be followed, from which a kind of a deviation can be considered. That is what the article is proposing, but broadly there should be a normative proportionality. Another recent update is from Assam, which says that Election Commission has now started public hearings in Assam, where it is proposing to retain the number of seats, although it has increased the reserved seats for SCs from 8 to 9 and for the STs from 16 to 19, and the reserved parliamentary seats have been proposed for the SCs and STs also. Although there are again protests because the methodology that is used there, that is questionable, and there are different average assembly sizes which are used for different districts over there. The next article is regarding Rule 267. This is in context of the Manipur issue, because the opposition has demanded that the Manipur issue should be discussed after a motion through the Rule 267 is passed. Now, what is Rule 267 in the Conduct of Business Rules of Rajya Sabha? It says that any rule can be suspended in its application to a motion related to the business listed before the council of that day. It suspends all the listed businesses and discusses an issue of importance. Now here the chairman decides whether to propose a motion to suspend a rule or not. After the chairman decides, then a voting happens. After that only that issue is taken up. Now the key here is, in the winter session, the chairman of Rajya Sabha that rejected 8 such notices within 2 days. And most of them, they were related to the border issues with China or the inflation, etc. But there are certain exemptions, that if there is a specific provision which exists for the suspension of a rule, then Rule 267 will not apply. Now, what is the significance of Rule 267? According to this, an issue of national importance can be raised, and there is no other type of discussion that calls for the suspension of other activities, because when an issue is discussed after a motion through the Rule 267, then it leads to the suspension of all the other businesses which are listed for that day, and the government is required to respond to that particular issue. Now, why it has been contentious? Because government usually, the chairman of Rajya Sabha usually rejects those notices given under Rule 267. Now, the government has proposed that in case of Manipur issue, a short duration discussion can be taken up under Rule 176. Now, what does Rule 176 say? Rule 176 says that an MP can raise a discussion on a matter of urgent public importance. Now, here in this case, time will be allotted by the Business Advisory Committee of the House, and the notice specifying the matters to be raised and the reasons for doing so can be asked, have to be submitted. Now, the chairman will decide the admissibility of such notice, and he can seek such information from the MP who is giving that notice also, as he deems fit, and this is followed by the other MPs discussing this issue, and the minister in charge responds at the end of the discussion. The next article is regarding Ayushman Bharat implementation. This article is talking about a case study, which can be used in medical ethics also, as per which a neurosurgeon in Safdarjung Hospital, he was telling people that for taking the benefit of Ayushman Bharat, it will take 2 to 3 months, and therefore you should take recourse to the alternative expensive remedies which are available. That is, of course, unethical. Now let's talk about Ayushman Bharat scheme also and its implementation and its lacunas. As of 2022, more than 18 crore health cards have been issued under this scheme, and more than 3.5 crore people have availed the health facilities. Now this scheme is launched as part of the National Health Policy 2017 to achieve a universal health coverage, and it will ensure that the Sustainable Development Goal 3 that is also achieved, which envisions to leave no one behind. Now this is an entitlement based scheme, and the beneficiaries are identified through an SECC data, a socio-economic caste census, and the funding is shared 60-40, that is 60% funds are given by the central government and 40% by the state governments or the union territories which have legislatures, whereas 90-10 is the funding ratio for the hilly states, that is Jammu Kashmir, Himachal, Uttarakhand and the northeastern states, and 100% central funding is provided by the center for the union territories without the legislature. So this is ensuring a continuum of care approach through two main subparts. One is the health and wellness centers, and second is the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana. Now these health and wellness centers, they are created, 1.5 lakh health and wellness centers are created by transforming the existing PHCs, primary health centers and sub-centers, and they deliver the comprehensive primary health care by bringing health care closer to home. And it ensures both maternal and child care health services are provided, and even the non-communicable diseases, they are also treated. It provides for free essential drugs and diagnostic services as well. Now this is complemented by the Jan Arogya Yojana. Now Jan Arogya Yojana is the largest health assurance scheme in the world. The health cover of 5 lakh per family in a year is provided for secondary and tertiary care hospitalization to over 10 crore poor and vulnerable families. This accounts for 50 crore beneficiaries and about 40% of the bottom Indian population. This is fully funded and the cost of implementation is shared. The implementing agency will be the National Health Authority, and the state health authority agencies are also created in the form of a society or a trust by various states. And under this scheme, about 23,000 hospitals are empaneled, 40% of which are private. There is an Ayushman Bharat digital mission also, which seeks to create a digital ecosystem, connect the digital health solutions of the hospitals, and the processes will be simplified of the hospitals, and it will increase the ease of living. How it will create a digital ecosystem? There will be digital consultation. There will be a digital consent also, that is the patients can give consent to the medical practitioners for them to access their medical records, and also the medical records, they will never be lost. And there will be a creation of a health facility registry also, which will help in storage of data. But there are certain issues in the Ayushman Bharat implementation. One is in terms of infrastructure. There is a shortage of doctors also and machines, for example, X-ray machines, etc. Then there is a lack of coordination in terms of center-state coordination also, in terms of the hospital insurance companies coordination also, a lack of awareness as is seen in the recent news article also, and the budgetary allocation that is often low. There is issues like corruption, for example, the event that happened in the Safdarjung hospital. There are inclusion and exclusion errors, and there is the issue of data availability at the micro level, that at the district level usually there is data available, at the village level, block level, etc. there is paucity of data to analyze the implementation and the success of the scheme. Thank you.